Welcome to Asian ID. Some love stories disappear the moment graduation songs fade into summer silence, while others remain buried beneath the skin for years like wounds that never fully heal. Don't they? Wild Lotus grows long seems determined to tell the second kind of story, doesn't it? Starring Zhai Yiying and Charon in their third collaboration together, the youth romance drama officially announced its April 30th premiere on Hwangoro's short drama, and before even airing, reservations had already surpassed an astonishing 2.31 million. Hadn't numbers like that no longer simply suggest anticipation, but rather reveal an audience emotionally preparing itself to relive forgotten heartbreaks through fictional characters once again? Don't they? Adapted from the popular novel Wild Grass Is Not the White Moonlight by Cheyenne's Han-wook Si-lu, the drama unfolds across two separate timelines that mirror each other like scars carried from youth into adulthood, doesn't it? The first half takes place during adolescence, where 18-year-old Yi struggles quietly beneath poverty, insecurity, and the invisible humiliation of constantly feeling smaller than the world around her, doesn't she? Then she meets Shink, the brilliant and untouchable top student whose privileged life seems impossibly distant from her own reality, doesn't she? He shines like someone born to be admired, while she survives like wild grass pushing stubbornly through cracked concrete, and from the very beginning their relationship carries the painful tension of two people wanting the impossible, doesn't it? Their first love blooms beneath school uniforms, summer sunlight, and awkward glances filled with emotions too fragile to speak aloud. Yet even in those beautiful moments the cruel shadow of social inequality quietly waits between them, doesn't it? And perhaps that is what makes youthful love feel so devastatingly unforgettable, because teenagers often believe sincerity alone can overcome reality until life proves otherwise. Doesn't it? An unexpected accident eventually destroys the fragile balance holding their relationship together, forcing them apart before they ever truly learn how to fight for each other, doesn't it? Their separation becomes the kind of unfinished heartbreak that lingers for years like a sentence never fully spoken, doesn't it? 7 years later, the story shifts into adulthood, where time has transformed both of them while failing to erase what once existed between them, hasn't it? Ji, portrayed by Zhai Yiying, grows into an independent middle school teacher whose calm maturity hides emotional scars that never completely faded. Doesn't she? The girl who once washed the same old school uniform repeatedly to conceal her poverty now stands confidently in front of classrooms, yet traces of her younger self still flicker quietly inside her eyes, don't they? Zhai Yiying appears especially suited for roles built around emotional resilience, doesn't she? Her crying scenes never rely on exaggerated breakdowns, but instead carry a suffocating fragility where pain seems trapped behind forced composure, making viewers feel as though every tear has already survived years of silent endurance before finally falling, doesn't it? Her gaze alone often feels capable of expressing entire paragraphs of unspoken regret, pride, loneliness, and stubborn self-protection, doesn't it? Meanwhile, Shink returns from abroad transformed into a successful entrepreneur, yet success has clearly failed to free him from the emotional consequences of his youth, hasn't it? Played by Charon, Shink evolves from an emotionally distant academic genius into a man carrying guilt, longing, and unresolved obsession so heavily that even his silence feels tired. Doesn't he? Charon portrays the transformation with striking emotional precision, doesn't he? During the school years, his cold restraint creates an almost intimidating distance, yet in adulthood that same restraint softens into tenderness filled with regret and devotion. Doesn't it? Watching Shink slowly abandon his pride in order to pursue Yi again creates the kind of emotional satisfaction audiences secretly crave from reunion romances, doesn't he? Because deep down, people do not merely want characters to reunite, but want proof that love can survive personal failure, bad timing, and the cruelty of growing older, don't they? This third collaboration between Zhai Yiying and Charon also carries enormous emotional expectations from viewers, doesn't it? Their previous projects, including Day and Night and Heartbeat, Read but Unreplayed, already proved how naturally their emotional rhythms align on screen, didn't they? Yet this time their chemistry appears deeper, quieter, and far more emotionally mature than before, doesn't it? Instead of relying entirely on dramatic flirting or exaggerated romantic tension, their interactions often feel painfully realistic in the way former lovers cautiously navigate unresolved feelings years after separation. Don't they? A single glance between them sometimes carries more emotional weight than entire confession scenes in other dramas, doesn't it? Unlike many youth romances obsessed with toxic rivalry and shallow melodrama, Wild Lotus grows long places female growth at the center of its narrative, doesn't it? Ji's journey is not merely about being loved, but about learning how to preserve dignity and self-worth while surviving poverty, prejudice, and emotional abandonment, isn't it? The focus gives the story emotional depth beyond ordinary romance fantasies, Because audiences are not only watching a relationship develop, but also witnessing a young woman slowly reclaim ownership of her own life, aren't they visually? The drama also appears unusually refined for a short-form production, doesn't it? The cinematography captures both youthful nostalgia and adult loneliness with a soft realism that makes every classroom hallway, evening street, and silent reunion feel emotionally loaded with memory. Doesn't it? The costume design carefully reflects changing time periods without becoming distracting, while the pacing remains tight enough to sustain emotional tension without unnecessary filler. Doesn't it? Perhaps the most haunting aspects of the story lies in its central question about love itself. Doesn't it? Is true love simply the intensity of youthful emotion experienced during adolescence, or is it the decision to keep returning to someone even after life has already changed both of you completely? Could it be both, from school uniforms to wedding promises, from painful separation to eventual reunion? Wild Lotus Grows Long seems less interested in idealized romance than in exploring whether emotionally wounded people can still choose each other after years of disappointment and regret, doesn't it? And maybe that is exactly why so many viewers are already emotionally invested before the drama has even fully aired. Isn't it? Because almost everyone has experienced at least one person they failed to hold on to when they were younger, haven't they? Someone who once felt temporary but later became unforgettable. Someone whose absence quietly shed the rest of life long after the relationship itself ended. Hasn't that happened to many people? So when April 30th finally arrives and Yi and Shenk meet again after years apart, perhaps viewers will not merely be watching fictional characters reunite at all, but confronting the ghosts of their own unfinished stories sitting silently beside them in the dark, won't they? Thank you for watching the video. See you again.